Welcome to this explainer. Right off the bat, we're diving into literally one of the most baffling maritime mysteries in human history. So, picture this. It's December 5th, 1872. A British ship called the Dei Gratia is just sailing along its standard route. And about 400 miles off the coast, the crew spots something weird. It's another vessel, just kind of drifting aimlessly out there in the open water. The captain of the Dei Gratia, David Morehouse, tries to hail them. He sends signals, waits for a response, but nothing. Just total eerie silence. And here's the kicker. Captain Morehouse actually recognized this drifting ship. It was the Mary Celeste. She had just left New York 8 days earlier, captained by a good friend of his, Benjamin Briggs. By all accounts, the Mary Celeste should have been way further along its route, so what on earth was it doing just floating around out here?
Getting zero response, Captain Morehouse leads a boarding party to go check it out. And what they found, or I guess what they didn't find, sparked a mystery that we're literally still talking about over a century later. The ship was completely abandoned, not a single soul on board. But here's the thing, there were zero signs of violence, no struggle, no fire. Everything looked totally fine, which leaves us with this massive haunting question. How did 10 people just vanish into thin air in the middle of the deep ocean?
Let's break that down for a second, because exactly 10 people went missing without a trace here. And this wasn't just some bare-bones skeleton crew. We're talking about Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, their innocent 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and 7 highly trained first-class crew members. Briggs was famous for handpicking his guys, meaning every single sailor on that ship was a seasoned professional. They all left New York a little over a week prior, and now, poof, gone. A captain of that caliber and a crew that experience don't just abandon ship together without a massive catastrophic reason.
Let's move to part 1, the investigation, clues left behind.
If we put on our 19th century maritime investigator hats for a second, what's truly fascinating is the sheer contrast between what was left perfectly intact and what was missing. On the left behind list, 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol. That was their main cargo, and it was pretty much untouched. They also had 6 months' worth of food and water, completely fine. Even the crew's personal belongings and clothes were still in their quarters, right where they left them. But missing? The ship's official papers, the captain's navigation tools, and, arguably the most important clue, the ship's one and only small lifeboat.
Aside from those missing items, the physical state of the ship was honestly pretty bizarre. Down in the hold, there was about 3.5 to 4 feet of standing water. Both the front and back hatch covers had been completely taken off. Curiously, one of the 2 pressure pumps, the ones used to measure and pump out water, was completely disassembled. But the absolute most chilling clue of all was the logbook. The last entry was written on November 25th at 8 a.m., meaning the crew had been missing for 10 whole days. For 10 days, this ghost ship had been sailing completely blind through the open ocean. Oh, and while the crew's quarters were tidy, the captain's cabin looked slightly ransacked, almost like someone had grabbed a few things in an absolute panic.
Which brings us to part 2, a cursed beginning.
Now, to really wrap our heads around this enigma, we actually have to jump back a bit to 1861. Long before she was the Mary Celeste, this 100-foot vessel was built in Canada and named the Amazon. And guys, a lot of people believe this ship was just doomed from day one. I mean, disaster struck almost immediately. Just weeks after being built, its very first captain suddenly falls ill and dies. Then, while it's undergoing repairs, the entire shipyard it's sitting in catches fire and burns straight to ashes. Moving into the mid-1860s, the financial ruin just kept coming. Its owner goes bankrupt, and then the Amazon actually collides with another ship and sinks it to the bottom of the ocean. Finally, by 1869, this supposedly cursed vessel is just left abandoned in a Canadian port in absolutely terrible condition. It literally left a trail of death, fire, and bankruptcy in its wake.
But then, an American Marine decided to take a huge gamble. In 1869, he buys the cursed Amazon, fixes her up, and gives her a total rebrand. A new name, the Mary Celeste. But, as we know, despite the fresh coat of paint and new ownership, it really seemed like that dark cloud was just biding its time, waiting to catch up with Captain Briggs and his crew.
All right, let's get into part 3, 4 theories of disappearance.
So when Captain Morehouse towed this ghost ship into Gibraltar, people went crazy. Wild rumors about sea monsters and alien abductions were everywhere. But the actual authorities narrowed it down to 4 main grounded theories. Theory number 1, mutiny and murder.
The Attorney General of Gibraltar was convinced there was foul play. His idea was that the crew basically broke into those 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol, got completely intoxicated, murdered Captain Briggs and his family, and made a run for it in the lifeboat. Investigators even pointed to what looked like axe marks on the woodwork and these weird dark spots on the captain's sword that looked suspiciously like dried blood.
Sounds like a solid open and shut case, right? Well, scientific tests quickly debunked this entire theory. They tested those dark spots on the sword and the deck, and guess what? Absolutely not blood. Also, remember that industrial alcohol? It wasn't the kind you drink. It was a highly toxic solvent. So with the blood evidence totally thrown out the window, the court started looking really closely at the only other people involved, the very men who rescued the ship. And that leads us directly to theory number 2, salvage fraud. See, under maritime law, if you rescue an abandoned ship, you're entitled to a massive proportional reward based on the value of the ship and its cargo. So rumors spread like wildfire that Captain Morehouse actually found the Mary Celeste while the crew was still on it, murdered his friend Captain Briggs and everyone else, tossed them overboard, and then casually towed the empty ship into Gibraltar just to collect a massive payday. The court dug really deeply into this, but in the end, they honestly couldn't find a single shred of evidence to prove any murder took place. However, the authorities were still incredibly suspicious of Morehouse. Because they couldn't shake that lingering doubt, they hit him where it hurts, his wallet. Instead of a huge payout, Morehouse was only awarded $8,000. Now, that was definitely a lot of money back then, but it was a mere 1/6 of the total salvage value. They couldn't prove he did it, but the lack of trust was glaringly obvious. Okay, moving on to theory number 3, insurance fraud and madness. This one branches into 2 pretty wild speculations. First, some people thought Briggs and Morehouse were actually secretly working together on an elaborate insurance scam, and that Briggs and his crew were just hiding out somewhere. The alternative idea was much darker. People speculated that Captain Briggs, who was known to be a deeply religious man, just suffered a sudden mental break. In a fit of madness, he committed a horrific murder-suicide and took his family and crew down with him. But again, just like the first 2 theories, there was absolutely zero concrete evidence to back up either of these claims.
Let's look at part 4, theory 4, the explosion and abandonment.
Now, this final theory is the one heavily supported by modern forensic researchers like Anne McGregor, and it honestly provides the most logical sequence of events. Let's walk through it step by step. First, by cross-referencing ocean data, we know faulty navigation instruments likely led the ship 120 miles off course into some severely rough weather. That explains those missing navigation tools. Second, during that storm, water gets into the hold and 9 barrels of that highly flammable industrial alcohol start leaking. Third, since the ship is sealed tight, toxic, explosive fumes start rapidly building up below deck. They're literally sitting on a ticking time bomb. So fourth step, realizing the ship could blow at any second, the experienced captain makes the only call he can. He orders everyone into the small lifeboat to temporarily abandon ship. They tie a tow rope to the Mary Celeste, planning to just wait out back until the fumes clear. But tragically, in those rough seas, that tow rope violently snaps. The ship just sails away on its own, leaving 10 souls stranded in a tiny boat in the vast ocean. This beautifully explains the disassembled water pump, the removed hatch covers to vent the fumes, the missing lifeboat, and exactly why they left all their perfectly good food and clothes behind.
Let's wrap up with part 5, the ship's fiery end.
Amazingly, the story doesn't end with the missing crew. The supposed curse kept going, ruining pretty much everyone who owned the ship next. By 1885, this vessel's reputation was so terrifying that nobody wanted it. It was sold at a huge loss until it was finally bought by a guy named Captain Gilman C. Parker. And Parker realizes there's only one way to make money off this cursed ship. He has to destroy it. So he loads it up with entirely worthless cargo, sails it out, deliberately sets it on fire, and intentionally crashes it straight into a reef off the coast of Haiti.
And why did he go through all that trouble? For the insurance money, of course. Parker had insured that literally worthless cargo for a staggering $30,000. His plan was to send the legendary ghost ship to a watery grave and walk away incredibly rich. But insurance investigators are pretty thorough. They dug into it and very quickly uncovered the blatant fraud. And here is where the legend of the curse truly cements itself. Captain Parker and his conspirators actually managed to dodge prison time on a weird legal technicality, but they didn't escape the ship's revenge. Within just 3 months of the trial ending, their ultimate fates were sealed. Captain Parker suddenly died in absolute rock-bottom poverty.
One of his co-conspirators literally lost his mind and went entirely insane, and the second co-conspirator committed suicide. It's almost as if the ship reached out and claimed its final victims.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to reflect on this impossible trail of tragedy. From its very first captain dropping dead weeks after it was built, to the chilling disappearance of 10 people in the middle of the ocean, to the incredibly dark fates of the men who finally destroyed it. Ask yourself, was the Mary Celeste just a victim of terrible coincidences, bad weather, and human error? Or, looking at all the evidence we've covered today, was this vessel genuinely cursed from the very beginning? What do you think really happened out there in the deep ocean? Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.